Have you ever loved someone so quietly, so completely, that you didn't even realize it until they were gone? Kate Monroe was never supposed to be more than the nanny, a temporary presence, a caretaker with a quiet past, and no place in boardrooms or black tie galas. But when a powerful CEO brought her into his home, something unexpected began to unfold, not just in his world, but in hers. What happens when someone with nothing to prove ends up exposing the deepest truths in a world obsessed with appearances? And when love appears not as a whirlwind, but as a choice disguised in silence, patience, and quiet acts of courage, would you recognize it in time? If you had to choose between the life you dreamed of and the people who became your home, what would you do? This is not a fairy tale. This is a story about finding your voice, risking your heart, and discovering that sometimes the most unexpected love is the one that sees you as you are. Like, share, subscribe, and now let's begin the story. It had been an ordinary Thursday morning when Kate Monroe's life quietly began to shift. The coffee maker in the Blackwell residence had sputtered once, twice, then surrendered completely, leaving behind the faint scent of burnt grounds. Kate, dressed in her usual jeans and cardigan, wiped the kitchen counter and smiled at the little boy, drawing dinosaurs on the tiled floor. "Does that one breathe fire?" "Leo," she asked gently. Leo, 6 years old, with a mop of sandy hair and a mind that never stopped worrying, looked up and nodded with all the seriousness of a budding paleontologist. "He only breathes fire when he's scared," he said. Kate smiled. "Makes sense. Sometimes the strongest ones hide their fear in fire." She was about to return to folding laundry when the door to the study opened. Richard Blackwell stood there, tall and composed as always, his gray suit pressed, his posture straight, but his voice carried an unusual tension. "Kate," he said, "I need a word." Kate's brow lifted, surprised. Richard didn't often speak to her directly, much less with urgency. She stood, brushing her hands on her apron, and stepped into the hallway, leaving Leo behind with his drawings. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm. Richard glanced at his watch. "The annual Blackwell Holdings Gala is tonight. My date canceled. I need you to come with me." She blinked. "I'm sorry. Come again." "You'll accompany me to the event?" he said, as if offering a ride to the grocery store. Kate couldn't help the soft laugh that escaped her. "Mr. Blackwell, I think you're confused. I'm your son's nanny, not your plus one. She canceled an hour ago. I don't have time to reschedule with someone else. You're here. You'll do. You'll do." The words sat between them like a cold draft. "I've arranged a stylist," he added quickly. "Hair, makeup, wardrobe, it's all handled." Kate crossed her arms. "I'm not a prop you can dress up and parade around." "No," he said, his tone leveling. "But you're poised, intelligent. You know how to hold a conversation. You'll make a better impression than most of the women they expect to see on my arm." Her eyes narrowed. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation," he replied, "and a solution." Kate paused. For a moment, her mind drifted back to the years she had studied community development, to the lectures she used to give at the student center, to the life she left behind when her mother fell ill, and everything else became a second priority. And now, here she was, $20 in her wallet, a nanny to a kind little boy, and a man in a suit asking her to stand beside him for a night that didn't belong to her. "I'm not dressing in sequins," she said finally. Richard nodded. "No sequins, just something that says you belong." She almost laughed again. "Do you really think I can make people believe that I don't need them to believe anything?" he said. "Just smile, and don't spill wine on a board member." She raised an eyebrow. "And what if I say no?" He paused. "Then I suppose I'll go alone." Kate looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Beneath the perfectly combed hair and the polished watch was a flicker of worry, of need, maybe even of fear. It wasn't about appearances. Not entirely. He didn't want to show up alone. Not tonight. "I'll think about it," she said. "Be ready by 7, he replied, already turning. She watched him disappear down the hallway. Her heart raced in her chest, not from excitement, but from something else. A question she hadn't asked herself in a long time. What if I don't belong because I've never given myself the chance to? That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Chicago skyline, a soft knock came at her door. A woman named Janet introduced herself as the stylist, carrying a garment bag and a box of soft leather heels. "We're going classy, but simple," Janet said with a warm smile. "You've got good bones." "Honey, we're just polishing the edges." 2 hours later, Kate stood in front of the tall mirror in the guest bedroom, unsure of who was looking back. Her hair was swept into a loose chignon, a few strands falling gently across her cheek. The dress was a deep navy, fitted but not flashy. The heels were low and manageable. Her eyes were the same, but brighter somehow. Calmer. Ready. Leo peeked in, his eyes wide. "You look like a lady in the movies." Kate laughed. "That's because someone did magic. Are you going on an adventure?" She bent down to meet his eyes. Maybe just for tonight. The Blackwell Holdings Gala was held each year at the Wren Hall Hotel, a historic building nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago, with marble columns that touched the ceiling and chandeliers the size of small cars. The place always smelled faintly of polish and old money. Richard Blackwell arrived precisely at 7:45 as expected. Punctuality, for him, was as natural as breathing. He adjusted his cufflinks in the lobby, nodded at the concierge, and waited near the velvet-draped entrance to the ballroom. He wasn't used to waiting. Then the elevator doors opened, and for the first time that evening, time slowed. Kate stepped out, her figure silhouetted by the warm lobby lights. The navy gown hugged her gently, with a high neckline and an open back, elegant without being loud. Her makeup was soft, emphasizing the calm strength in her eyes. She walked slowly, composed, her heels making barely a sound against the polished floor. When she reached him, Richard didn't speak right away. His gaze traveled from her dress to her eyes, then settled into something unreadable. "You clean up well," he said, finally. Kate tilted her head. "Not bad for a nanny, huh?" Richard didn't smile, but the silence he gave in return was almost a compliment. Inside the ballroom, the music hummed low, a quartet playing something classical and forgettable. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying trays of champagne and delicate appetizers. The room shimmered with gold, crystal, and polished ambition. Kate held onto Richard's arm loosely. She had agreed to this charade, but only on her terms. She wouldn't let herself feel small. I still don't know why you asked me, she murmured as they entered. Because I didn't want to come alone, Richard replied simply. That surprised her. For a man who built empires, loneliness seemed like an afterthought. A few heads turned, then a few more. People whispered behind raised glasses. Some smiled with curiosity, others with amusement. And then, from across the room, a woman in deep emerald green turned. Clara Hensley, Richard's ex-girlfriend. PR darling, granddaughter of a senator. Clara's gaze fixed on Kate with surgical precision. She made her way over, every step calculated. Well, this is new, Clara said, her voice smooth as silk, but cool as marble. You brought someone. This is Kate Monroe, Richard said, offering no further explanation. Kate extended her hand. Pleasure to meet you. Clara took it lightly, like one might shake a leaf. Interesting choice in color, she said, eyeing the navy. It's understated? Quiet. Kate smiled. Some of us don't like to scream when we enter a room. Clara's eyes narrowed, just slightly. And what is it you do? Ms. Monroe Kate could have said many things. That she'd studied social work. That she'd coordinated community programs. That she could stretch a grocery budget tighter than any board's quarterly review. Instead, she said, I help raise a remarkable little boy. Clara blinked, thrown off by the honesty. Well, she said, smiling tightly, we do admire women who support the family unit. A man in a tailored suit stepped into the circle, Gregory Langston, one of the firm's biggest investors. He looked at Kate and Richard, clearly intrigued. Richard, he said, aren't you going to introduce your new head of sustainability? Richard opened his mouth, but Kate stepped in. Oh, I'm not, she said gently. I just have thoughts. Gregory chuckled. Well, you speak like someone who understands more than most of the suits in this room. Kate gave a modest shrug. Maybe because I've had to live the things you all write reports about. The comment landed. A quiet ripple passed through the group, not unlike the way a stone disrupts still water. Clara took a sip of her wine, eyes flashing. Richard glanced at Kate, something unreadable again, but deeper this time. You have a way of making people listen? He said under his breath as they stepped away. Most people don't listen unless you make them, she replied. Later, they stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching as speeches were made, toasts were offered, and deals were quietly brokered behind champagne smiles. Kate's gaze swept the room, absorbing everything. These events, she said, feel like theater, everyone playing a part, waiting for applause. Richard looked down at his glass. And what role are you playing? She turned to him. The one that reminds you not all stories come from boardrooms. That night, as they walked back to the waiting car, the air between them was different, less formal, less staged. Kate looked at the stars above the Chicago skyline and whispered, half to herself, I never thought I'd be part of a night like this. You weren't part of it, Richard said. You changed it. She turned to him, surprised. I don't know what to do with that, she admitted. Then just accept it, he said. For now. The next morning, Kate stood barefoot in the Blackwell kitchen, waiting for the kettle to sing. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and outside the window, the sun was just beginning to cast long golden rays across the marble floor. Leo sat at the breakfast table, still in his pajamas, legs swinging under the chair as he munched on toast shaped like stars. Did you have fun last night? He asked between bites. Kate smiled softly. It was different. You looked like a movie star, he said, then added in a quieter voice. Dad didn't look like himself. He looked soft. She glanced over, surprised by the observation. Children always noticed what adults missed. Maybe he was just being kind. She offered. Or maybe he was nervous. Leo said. He kept fixing his jacket. Kate chuckled. Even grown-ups get nervous, buddy. But inside, something stirred. After breakfast, while Leo was playing with his model rockets, Kate stepped outside onto the porch. The late autumn air was crisp. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her body and sat on the swing that overlooked the garden. She hadn't meant to stay in this job so long. It was supposed to be temporary, just a few months to save some money, find her footing again. But time passed. Months bled into seasons. And slowly, this house, this little boy, this life not hers, but still familiar, had become her daily rhythm. Her fingers traced the worn wooden arm of the swing. She remembered another porch in a town far from Chicago. The scent of jasmine and motor oil, the sound of her mother's cough echoing through paper-thin walls. Kate had been 23 when the scholarship letter came. Full ride. State University. Psychology with a focus on social development. She'd packed her bags with hope, her future unfolding like a map. But by the end of her first semester, the calls had started. Mom isn't doing well. Can you come home for just a weekend? And then she fell again. The cancer spread quickly. Medical bills piled up. Her younger sister, Emily, was only 12. Their father had left years ago. There was no one else. Kate had returned home, telling herself it was just for a semester. She never went back. She became a full-time caretaker, a substitute teacher, a waitress on weekends, a shoulder for her sister, a quiet strength beside her mother's hospital bed. No graduation, no diploma, just long nights and early shifts. And through it all, Kate never asked for help. She had cried once, just once, on the floor of the laundry room when her mother passed. The scent of detergent mixing with the grief that soaked her shirt. Now, years later, people saw her smile and thought it meant ease. They had no idea it was stitched from every hard day she survived. That evening, while Leo napped, Kate wandered into the study. She wasn't snooping, just looking. On the shelves were leather-bound volumes and crystal bookends, photos of board meetings and fundraisers. One photo stood out: Richard in a tuxedo, his arm around Clara, both smiling stiffly. She stared at it for a beat longer than she meant to. Behind her, Richard's voice broke the silence. Most of those pictures don't mean much anymore. Kate turned slowly. Sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine, he said, stepping inside. That one was a charity gala in New York, 6 years ago, before Leo was born. Before I started reassessing things. Did you love her? Kate asked, then immediately regretted it. I'm sorry. That's not my place. Richard didn't answer right away. He moved to the window, his hands in his pockets. I think I loved the version of myself I was with her, he said finally. But it was built on expectations, not connection. They stood there in the quiet. What about you? He asked. Anyone back home? Kate shook her head. Not anymore. What did you study? Psychology. I wanted to work in community advocacy, programs for under-resourced families, mental health outreach. And now you're here. Now I'm here, she echoed. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet acceptance. Richard studied her for a long moment. Do you miss it? She looked at him, and for once didn't hide. Every day. But life has its own way of redrawing the map. Later that night, in her small apartment above the garage, Kate pulled out a box from under her bed. Inside were old notebooks, project drafts, lesson plans, and a thick folder labeled Community Uplift Initiatives, Drafts and Proposals. She had kept them all, just in case one day she had the chance to use them. She didn't know that chance was closer than she thought. Kate hadn't planned to eat dinner at the main house. Most evenings, she kept to her small apartment above the detached garage. Quiet. Simple meals, usually something she could stir together with rice or pasta and a pinch of memory. But that evening, as she was collecting Leo's scattered toys from the living room floor, Richard appeared at the doorway, jacket slung over one shoulder, sleeves rolled up. For once, he didn't look like the CEO of a billion-dollar company. You haven't eaten, have you? He asked, his voice casual but deliberate. Kate blinked. Not yet. Come on, he said. I had extra delivered, and Leo's already asleep. She hesitated. This wasn't part of the job. But something about his tone, not demanding, not forced, made her nod. The dining room was softly lit, the long table adorned with takeout containers from a Thai place near the river district. Real silverware, cloth napkins. No pretense. You always eat like this, she asked as she sat down. Like what fancy food in silence? Richard poured them both a glass of sparkling water. I'm not great with small talk. Kate smiled faintly. Good. I'm not great at pretending to care about stock prices. For a moment, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. They ate quietly for a while. The green curry was spiced just right, and the rice steamed gently between them. It felt less like a formal dinner, more like two people momentarily stepping out of their assigned roles. Leo mentioned something about you making up bedtime stories, Richard said. Kate looked up, surprised. He likes space adventures. And talking animals. Sometimes I just follow his lead. He said you gave the moon a voice, of course. How else would the stars know when to shine? Richard let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh, but something close. You're good with him, he said. Better than most professionals we've hired. Kate didn't respond right away. Compliments from Richard weren't exactly common currency. I just treat him like he matters, she said softly. There was a pause. He does. Then show him, she added, eyes steady. Not with gifts, with time. Richard leaned back slightly. You're not afraid of being honest? Are you? Not anymore, she replied. Life taught me it's more painful to stay quiet. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but reflective. I used to think I had to earn everything, Kate said after a moment. Every moment of rest, every kind word, every bit of respect. Like I had to prove I was worth the space I took up. Richard glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. And now I still feel that way. Some days, she admitted. But I'm learning to stop apologizing for existing. Another beat. I was raised to think emotions were weaknesses, he said quietly. That vulnerability was a luxury for people who didn't have to carry things. Did you carry a lot? He looked down at his plate, the curry now cold. I was 12 when my father started grooming me for this life. He said, every dinner was a lesson in negotiation, every mistake a failure of character. He didn't want a son, he wanted a successor. Kate listened without interruption. And your mother? She asked gently. She tried to soften the edges. He said, voice low. But she died when I was 16. After that, it was just business. Kate's heart ached quietly. She saw now beneath the tailored suits and steel demeanor a boy who had been forced to grow up too fast. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not looking for pity. It's not pity, she said. It's recognition. Their eyes met. Something shifted. After a while, Richard stood and walked to the kitchen. He returned with 2 mugs coffee for him, chamomile tea for her. Without asking, without a word. You don't have to play host, Kate said with a small laugh. I'm not, he replied. I just noticed. The moment hung in the air like steam above the cups. Thank you, she said. They sat in silence, sipping slowly. And in that quiet room, with no agenda, no pretense, just stories and the echo of hard truths, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but something like beginning. 2 days passed quietly after their dinner. Nothing was said, but something had changed. Kate noticed it in small ways. Richard lingered a second longer when she spoke. His gaze softer, less guarded. He asked for her opinion on things outside of Leo. The air between them no longer carried only formality, but something tentative. Then came the proposal. It was early evening. The sky outside painted in hues of soft lilac and burnt orange. Kate was sitting on the porch steps, folding laundry from a wicker basket, when Richard appeared. He didn't sit right away. Just stood beside the railing, arms crossed, a familiar weight behind his posture. I have a request, he said. Kate raised an eyebrow, folding a towel neatly. You always preface things like that when you know I might say no. He didn't smile. You're right, but I'll ask anyway. She nodded for him to continue. I want you to keep accompanying me to events. She blinked. You mean more galas? Galas? Dinners? Networking gatherings? Magazine interviews? Public appearances? Her brow furrowed. Why Richard exhaled? Because people are talking. After the last event, after what you said, after how you carried yourself, they think you're part of the company, part of me. I'm not, she said, gently but firmly. I know, he replied. But what if you were temporarily? Kate froze midfold. Are you asking me to pretend to be your girlfriend? Yes. For 2 months? Silence stretched between them. She stood up, slowly. Why would I ever agree to that? Because it benefits both of us, he said, steady. You'd be compensated? And it would allow you more access to the kind of people who could make your ideas real. She crossed her arms. So I get to dress up, smile on cue, and stand beside you while the world thinks I'm something I'm not. You'd be yourself, he said. That's the point. You being you makes people listen. Kate looked away, her jaw tight. This is absurd, she muttered. You think just because I showed up in a dress and said a few clever things, I'm ready to become some kind of pawn in your reputation strategy. No, he said, his voice low. I think you're smart, insightful, and that you've been underestimated for too long. The honesty in his words caught her off guard. He took a small step closer. I also think Leo adores you, and that I trust you. Kate held his gaze. Her chest tightened with the tension of decisions too big to name. I'm not for sale. Richard, she said. I'm not offering money in exchange for silence, he replied. I'm offering partnership. On your terms? She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. On my terms. Huh, we'll see about that. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Here are my conditions. He nodded. I'm listening. First, full autonomy with Leo. No interference. I care for him my way. Agreed. Second, I choose what I wear. No stylists unless I want them. Done. Third, you don't give me orders outside of whatever public arrangement we agree on. Understood. And fourth, she paused, stepping even closer. I decide when the act ends. Whether it's in 2 months or 2 weeks. No debate. No begging. When I say stop, it stops. Richard's eyes didn't waver. Deal. They stood in silence, inches apart. Kate extended her hand. Then we have ourselves a fake agreement. He took it, firm, direct, unflinching. But as their hands touched, something flickered beneath the surface, something that neither of them wanted to name. The first event after their agreement was a private dinner hosted at a lakeside estate in Winnetka. The invitation list included board members, tech investors, and a senator's wife who once turned down a handshake from a governor because his shoes were scuffed. Kate stood in front of the full-length mirror in her apartment, wearing a sleek dark green dress, modest neckline, sleeves just below the elbow, no shimmer, no statement jewelry. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, simple, intentional. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to observe, and perhaps to disrupt gently. When Richard came to pick her up, he said nothing for the first few moments. Then, finally, he cleared his throat. You look authentic. She smiled. That's the nicest awkward compliment I've ever received. In the car, the silence between them was companionable. The city lights faded into the silhouettes of large trees and gated mansions. When they arrived, valet attendants in bow ties opened doors with practiced precision. Inside, the estate glowed with soft lighting and the low hum of a jazz trio. Champagne flutes clinked. Conversation floated like perfume. Kate took a breath. She didn't belong here. Not by upbringing, not by title. But she belonged in herself, and that was enough. As they entered, heads turned, some curious, some assessing, others politely indifferent. A few board members offered curt nods. Then came the first whisper, disguised behind a smile. Isn't that the nanny? Kate heard it. So did Richard. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he placed his hand gently on the small of her back, guiding her forward not possessively, but as if to say, you're exactly where you should be. They were seated near the front, across from a French investor named Delacroix and his partner, who worked in international development. So, Miss Monroe, Delacroix said with a warm accent and skeptical smile, what line of work brings you to these glossy rooms? Kate sipped her water, then set it down deliberately. People work, she said. Community initiatives, education equity, early intervention for underserved youth. The table went quiet for a breath. That is, not a common resume here, his partner added. No, Kate agreed. But the problems are common. We just choose whether or not to look at them. Delacroix leaned forward, intrigued. You sound like you've been on the ground. I have, she said. and I have a drawer full of ideas no one's funded yet. Across the table, Richard watched her silent, but visibly engaged. Later, during the mingling portion of the evening, a tall man with white hair approached. "Miss Monroe," he said, extending his hand. "I've been told you're not officially part of Blackwell Holdings, yet you seem to speak with the confidence of someone who owns a stake." Kate shook his hand firmly. "I don't own a stake, sir. But I do believe in stakes, especially the kind that affect real lives." He chuckled. "Touché. I'm Senator McClellan, and I'd like to hear more." They moved to a quieter corner of the room. She didn't push, she didn't pitch. She just shared stories, patterns, the cost of ignoring neighborhoods until they riot, the genius lost in broken school systems, the way dignity starts with being seen. McClellan didn't interrupt. He just listened. After he left, Richard appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of lemon water. "I take it back," he said. "Take what back? You're not just good with Leo. You're good with this." Kate took the glass. "I'm not playing a part. Richard, I'm just being myself." "I know," he said. "That's what makes you dangerous." She looked at him, eyes narrowing playfully. "To you, to all of us," he replied. As the night drew on and the air outside cooled, Kate found a quiet moment alone on the terrace. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. For a second, she let herself breathe. Not as an act, not for appearances. Just as a woman remembering she had once dreamed of rooms like this, not for the chandeliers, but for the conversations. Richard joined her after a while. No words, just 2 people staring at still water, standing in a silence that felt earned. "You did well tonight," he said finally. Kate didn't turn to him. "They don't know what to make of me." "Maybe that's the point," he replied. When they left the estate, she didn't look back. She was no longer just a +1. She was a force, and people were beginning to notice. The invitation came on crisp ivory paper with a gold seal. The annual Westbridge Leadership Dinner. Not just a social event, it was the event. CEOs, philanthropists, senators, international delegates. Reputation wasn't just expected there. It was manufactured there. Kate stood in front of her closet that evening, holding up 2 options, a flowing cream dress with cap sleeves, or a structured charcoal one with clean lines and understated grace. She chose the latter, dignity over dazzle. As Richard waited by the car, Leo peeked around the corner. "You look like a real leader," he whispered. Wide-eyed, Kate bent down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Thanks." "Astronaut?" He grinned. "Dad gets less grumpy when you're around." She laughed. "Maybe he just needs a story sometimes. Like you do." The ride to the Westbridge Grand Hotel was quiet. Richard focused on his phone, as always, thumbing through notes. Kate watched the city blur by, her fingers folded tightly in her lap. "You don't have to say anything tonight," he said suddenly. "Just be present." Kate turned to him. "I'm always present. That's what makes me dangerous. Remember?" A flicker of a smile crossed his face. Then it vanished, inside the ballroom. Everything gleamed marble floors, crystal chandeliers, silver-threaded drapes. Servers in tuxedos weaved silently among guests. They were barely 3 steps in when Clara Hensley emerged, in a sapphire dress, every inch tailored to perfection. Clara moved with the grace of someone born in the spotlight. Her gaze swept over Kate and landed on Richard like a claim. "Well," Clara said, smile sharpened, "this is unexpected." "Clara," Richard greeted, neutral. "Kate, you remember Clara?" Kate nodded. "Of course." Clara's eyes lingered. "You clean up well?" Again. Kate raised an eyebrow. "I've had practice." "I suppose it's admirable," Clara said, turning slightly toward the small group gathering around her. "Bringing someone grounded keeps things real." Kate recognized the tone. The smile that wasn't a smile. The insult wrapped in silk. She was about to reply when another guest joined them, Alan Grover, a media executive who practically made a living broadcasting boardroom gossip. "Ah, the mystery woman," Alan said, looking at Kate. "We've been hearing such interesting things about you." Kate tilted her head. "Have you? Oh, yes. The woman who's turned Blackwell Holdings into a buzzword for progress. The advisor with a silver tongue?" He chuckled. "Imagine our surprise when someone mentioned you were originally hired to watch the kid." Silence dropped like a curtain. Kate's heart thudded once, then settled into stillness. She glanced at Richard, who stood stiff, unreadable. "Is that true?" Alan added, feigning curiosity. Clara gave a soft laugh. "Oh, didn't you know she's the nanny?" Someone coughed into their glass. Kate turned back to the group. Her voice was steady, calm, firm. "Yes," she said. "I was, and still am, Leo's nanny." A few eyebrows raised. Whispers scattered like wind. She continued, "Before that, I was a caregiver, a waitress, a substitute teacher, a cashier, a sister, a daughter, a survivor." Her gaze swept across the faces, and in every job, I gave my best. I still do. The room stood still for a beat. Kate turned to Richard, hoping for something. Anything. A nod. A word. But he stayed silent, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes distant. That hurt more than Clara's jab, more than the laughter. Kate straightened. "Thank you for the reminder," she said, looking directly at Clara. "Sometimes it's good to remember where we come from, especially when we've climbed too high to see the ground." Then she walked away, not rushed, not shaken, just finished. Outside, the air was cold. She didn't wait for the driver. She walked to the edge of the hotel courtyard, her hands buried in her coat. Her phone buzzed. A message from Richard. "Kate, please wait. Let me explain." She turned the screen off. Inside, in a room full of power and applause, he had chosen silence, and that said everything. The house was too quiet. After Kate left the Westbridge Gala, Richard returned alone to a space that felt larger, colder than it had the night before. Leo was asleep upstairs. The lights were dimmed, and everything in the house felt slightly off, as though it knew someone vital was missing. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, sat down in the study, and stared into the fireplace, unlit, unused, like most things he owned. He replayed the moment again and again. The way Kate had looked at him, the silence he had offered in return, and the weight of that silence now pressed on his chest like a stone. He'd let her stand alone. In a room full of power and performance, he'd done the one thing she'd never done to him. He'd failed to see her. He didn't know how to fix it. But he knew where he needed to start. He walked to the cabinet in the far corner of the study, a small, locked drawer where Leo's educational files, old nanny resumes, and miscellaneous papers were kept. He dug through until he found the envelope Kate had handed him months ago when she first arrived. Back then, he'd skimmed it, barely noting her credentials. Overqualified, he remembered thinking. But he hadn't looked deeper. He opened it now. Inside were more than just the standard forms. There were letters of recommendation, not glowing, but reverent. A community center director wrote Kate Monroe gave up her scholarship to care for her ailing mother. But even while waitressing full-time, she volunteered twice a week to tutor underprivileged kids in math and reading. I've never met someone who could command a classroom with such kindness and conviction. Another letter. Kate founded a local mental health workshop using her own savings and free resources. We thought no one would show. Then we ran out of chairs. Behind the letters was a folder. On the tab, handwritten community uplift initiatives, drafts and proposals. He opened it. What he found stunned him. Detailed proposals broken into phases, budget outlines, partner projections, testimonials from community members, strategic frameworks for how corporations could support local infrastructure without exploitation. She had done all of this, alone, with no funding, no title, just a fierce, quiet belief that something better was possible. Richard sank back in his chair. He remembered now the things she'd said at dinner, the way she carried herself at events. Not as someone who wanted a seat at the table, but as someone who had built her own and brought folding chairs for others. And he had reduced her, in one moment, with one silence, to a role she had long outgrown. He closed the folder gently, then sat still for a long time. Later that night, he stood outside her apartment above the garage. The light was off. He didn't knock, he just stood there, unsure of what he'd say, even if she opened the door. Back inside, he opened his phone and typed a message. I read the file. I should have done it sooner. I see you now, and I'm sorry. But he didn't hit send, because sorry was too small. The next morning, Kate didn't come for breakfast. The nanny schedule was still active, but she'd asked for time off, indefinite. Leo asked, "Is she sick?" "No," Richard said. "She just needs space." "Did you make her sad?" Richard paused. "I think I did." Leo looked down. "You should say sorry." "I'm trying to find the right way," Richard said. Leo, ever wiser than his years, nodded. "Make it big. Big sorries are better than little ones." That night, Richard sat in the study again, folder open in front of him. He wasn't reading anymore, he was learning. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't see Kate as part of his story. He saw himself as part of hers. The Blackwell Holdings Quarterly Summit was never meant for surprises. Held in the company's Chicago headquarters, it was a strictly structured event. Board members flew in from across the country. Analysts prepped graphs. Executives rehearsed their speeches down to the comma. Everything was timed. Everything was controlled, except this time. Nothing went as planned. Kate hadn't intended to be there. After days of silence, she'd returned only to pick up a few things. She wore jeans, a simple cardigan, and carried her worn leather notebook, not a power suit, not heels, not a polished presence fit for boardrooms. But fate had other plans. As she passed the glass hallway leading to the executive conference room, she heard Leo's voice. "Miss Kate." She turned. He ran toward her, arms outstretched. Richard followed behind, slower, uncertain. You came? Leo beamed. I just came for a few things, she said gently, hugging him. Richard stepped closer. Kate shook her head slightly. Not here. Not now. Before he could say more, a flustered assistant rushed toward them. Mr. Blackwell, she said breathlessly. Mr. Dalton is sick. He was supposed to present the social responsibility segment. We don't have a backup. Richard frowned. What do you mean, I mean? It's in 2 minutes. Richard looked around, then at Kate. No, she said immediately. Don't even think about it. You've read the file, he replied. You wrote better ones. I'm not dressed for this. They won't be looking at your clothes. Kate hesitated. Leo tugged her sleeve. You always know the right words. She looked down at the boy, then at Richard, then nodded. Inside the room, 20 powerful people sat around an oval table, sipping espresso, flipping through thick binders. They barely noticed her entrance until she stood at the front of the room and began to speak. I wasn't supposed to be here, Kate said, voice calm. But perhaps that's the point. Chairs shifted, eyes rose. I'm not an executive, not a consultant, not an investor. I'm someone who has stood on the receiving end of this company's impact, both its silence and its promises. A pause. In your binders, you'll see the numbers, but I'd like to tell you about the names behind those numbers. She opened her notebook. Carlos, age 11, lives in a food desert, dreams of being a doctor, but walks 4 miles just to borrow a textbook. Maya, age 16, first in her family to finish high school. No access to mental health support after losing her brother. She looked up. You fund scholarships, that's good. But where's the support that helps kids stay in school after the scholarships run out? Where's the community investment that lasts beyond the press release? The room had gone completely still. This company has the power to shift not just markets, but lives. You talk about legacy. What if it wasn't just buildings and bottom lines, but changed neighborhoods and rewritten futures? Someone finally spoke, a board member in her 60s. Who are you? Kate didn't flinch. My name is Kate Monroe. I'm Leo's nanny, and also a former student of social work, a program director without funding, and a woman who still believes that dignity begins with being seen. She closed the notebook. And you just saw me. Silence. Then applause. Not scattered. Not polite. A real, steady, rising sound of recognition. Kate didn't wait for thanks. She stepped down, nodded politely, and exited. Outside, Richard was waiting. You didn't just speak, he said. You delivered the whole damn boardroom. I told the truth, she replied. He looked at her for a long moment. You belong in that room. No, she corrected him. That room needs to belong to people like me. He smiled genuinely this time. I'll start making space, and I'll keep filling it, she said. The letter came in a thick, white envelope, embossed with a gold emblem. Kate didn't recognize at first. She turned it over twice before sliding her finger under the seal. Inside was an offer. Executive Director of Community Strategy, National Impact Initiative, Washington, D.C. The terms were generous, full autonomy, funding, a team, an open platform to implement the very proposals she once scribbled in her notebook, hoping someone would care enough to read them. They did now. She read the letter 3 times. Then she set it down and stared at the wall, her tea growing cold beside her. It was everything she had once asked for, everything she had almost given up hoping for. But now, it would cost her something else. That evening, she walked Leo home from school. He held her hand, swinging it slightly as he recounted how he taught his friend Jonah to say dinosaur in French dinosaur. He pronounced carefully. Kate laughed. That's impressive. He beamed. I want to be a paleontologist and a linguist. You'll be whatever you decide, she said softly. They reached the front steps of the house. Kate hesitated. Leo, she began, can I ask you something? He looked up. Sure. If you had to go somewhere far away, to learn more, to help more people, but it meant being away from the people you love, would you go? Leo frowned, thinking hard. Is it forever? No. Just for a while? Can I still talk to them? Of course. He nodded, thoughtful. Then I think I'd go, but I'd tell them I love them first, so they don't forget. Kate smiled, and something in her chest cracked a little. Later that night, she found Richard in the study, his sleeves rolled up, glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He looked up when she entered, saw the envelope in her hand, and knew. They want me, she said. He said nothing. They want my work, my voice, my vision. Still, silence. I didn't think this moment would come. She continued, but it has, and I don't know if I'm ready. Richard stood slowly. You are? Kate looked at him. Then why does it feel like leaving you, leaving Leo, will break something in me? He stepped closer. Because you didn't plan to care this much. And now you do. Tears burned behind her eyes. I wasn't supposed to stay. You knew that. I did. And yet you made me feel like I belonged here. You do? He said quietly. She shook her head. Not in the long run. He reached for her hand. You belonged in my life. And Leo's. Whether you stay or not doesn't change that. Her voice cracked. He's going to ask why I left. Then we'll tell him the truth, Richard said. That sometimes love means letting someone grow, even if it hurts. Kate looked down at their joined hands. I was never just the nanny to him, she whispered. No, Richard replied, and you were never just a woman I hired. They stood there, the silence louder than ever. 3 days later, she packed. Leo helped. He folded shirts badly, stuffed socks in the wrong places, and placed a plastic dinosaur in the corner of her suitcase. For when you feel lonely, he said. Kate knelt and pulled him into a hug that felt like both goodbye and a promise. Will you visit? He asked. Whenever I can, she said. And we'll call. Write letters. I'll even send you fossils. He grinned. Real ones. Maybe. That night, as she closed her apartment door for the last time, she turned and looked at the house where everything had changed. Not just her job, her voice, her path, her heart. Richard waited by the car. You're sure he asked one last time? No, she admitted, but I'm brave. He nodded. You always were. She climbed into the car, and as it pulled away, she didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she knew some goodbyes weren't endings. They were beginnings in disguise. The first morning in Washington. See. Kate woke to a silence that felt unfamiliar. No tiny footsteps running to her door. No smell of pancakes or Leo's voice arguing with the television about space facts. Just the quiet hum of a city waiting to be known. She stood by the window of her modest new apartment, overlooking a tree-lined street filled with commuters and possibilities. She wrapped her hands around a cup of black coffee and whispered to herself, "You're here. You did it." At the National Impact Initiative office, her name was etched into the glass of a new door, Catherine Monroe, Director of Community Strategy. People stood when she entered the room. They listened when she spoke. They didn't know her as the nanny. They knew her as the woman with a vision and a plan to make it real. But even on the most productive days, even after meetings that ended with applause, she found herself wondering, what is Leo reading now? Did Richard finally try cooking something other than reordering tieback in Chicago? The Blackwell house had changed, too. Leo noticed it first. "Dad, your tie doesn't match your shirt," he said at breakfast one morning. Richard glanced down. "It doesn't? Nope." Kate would have said it was a mild disaster. Richard smirked. She would have been right. He'd grown quieter lately, more thoughtful. He read Leo bedtime stories now, sat in on teacher calls, kept one of Kate's lesson routines because Leo insisted it made his brain feel like it was smiling. And after Leo fell asleep, Richard often found himself in the study, staring at the file folder labeled Community Uplift Initiatives, wondering how he'd missed it for so long. One evening, while reorganizing some boxes, he found a small notebook Kate had left behind. Inside were scribbled quotes, doodles, and fragments of thought. Don't wait for permission to change something. Just start. Everyone matters. But we forget to act like it. Leo laughs like he's never been hurt. I hope he never learns how to fake it. Richard read the last line 3 times. They spoke only through emails at first. Kate would send updates, brief, professional, warm. Richard replied with small anecdotes, how Leo passed his spelling test, how the board approved a new local project, her idea, how the company finally adopted one of her models for educational partnerships. Then, one night, he wrote more than he planned. "I went by your apartment yesterday. The upstairs light was off. I didn't expect that to feel like a loss, but it did. The house is still full, but somehow emptier." Kate didn't respond right away. But a few days later, she sent a photo her new office wall, where she had pinned Leo's drawing of a dinosaur and one of Richard's old quotes from a speech. Even walls deserve to remember the people who changed them. The space between them began to feel less like absence and more like realignment. See? Kate was thriving. She spoke on panels, sat across from decision makers who, once upon a time, wouldn't have taken her call. Her ideas were being implemented in pilot programs from Baltimore to Albuquerque. But at night, after the applause and progress reports, she still reread Leo's last letter. "Miss Kate, I'm learning big words like galaxy and gratitude. I'm grateful for you. Also, Dad misses you, even if he doesn't say it. But I do. Come visit when you're ready." Kate pressed the paper to her chest. It wasn't homesickness. It was heart sickness. For people who had become part of her rhythm. For a house that had become more than shelter. For a man who had once said nothing and now said everything without speaking. One Thursday morning, nearly 2 months since she left, Kate stepped out of a rideshare and onto a familiar Chicago sidewalk. She wasn't sure what she was doing there, but her feet led her toward the house with the gray shutters and the little swing out front. Before she could reach the door, it opened. Leo's voice rang out, "You're here." He barreled into her like a rocket. Kate knelt, holding him tightly. You grew. I told you I would, he said proudly. Then another voice, quieter Kate. She stood slowly. Richard looked different, not in appearance, but in presence, softer around the edges, still in control, but somehow clearer. I didn't know you were coming, he said. I didn't either, she admitted. They stood there for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and handed him a thin envelope. It's not a resignation, she said, but it is something I want you to read. He took it without opening it. What is it, he asked. She met his eyes. A proposal. Not business. Just life. And for the first time, there was no space between them. Just breath and hope. Richard read the letter 3 times. Not because it was long, it wasn't. Just a page. But every word was deliberate, weighted, real. Kate had written it in her signature style, simple, direct, and impossibly human. Dear Richard, you once asked me what I wanted most. The answer has changed. It used to be a seat at the table, a voice in the room, a chance to matter. But now, I want a life where I don't have to fight to be seen, a home that listens back, a love that grows not from need, but from choice. I'm not asking you to promise me forever. I'm just asking you to meet me here. Now, with honesty and heart. Kate Richard folded the letter, tucked it into his coat pocket, and walked out the door. Kate sat on the park bench 2 blocks away, fingers curling around a coffee cup that had gone cold. She didn't know if he'd read it yet, or if he'd come, but she'd meant every word. She didn't need a grand gesture. She didn't want a fairy tale. She wanted truth, the kind that stayed after the spotlight faded. Footsteps approached. She turned. There he was. No suit. No entourage. Just Richard, in a sweater that Leo had probably picked, holding something behind his back. Is this seat taken? He asked. Kate smiled. It's been waiting. He sat beside her. They didn't rush, didn't explain. The silence between them felt like shelter, not distance. Finally, he spoke. I never planned to feel this much. Me neither, she said softly. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded piece of paper. My turn. Kate unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map, crude but sweet. 1 road, 2 houses, a dotted line connecting them. At the end, written in Leo's handwriting, Miss Kate, come back whenever. This is your way home. She pressed the paper to her heart, then looked at Richard. What does this mean? It means I'm not offering a job, he said, or a role, or a title. Then what are you offering? He looked straight into her eyes. A partnership. One that starts and ends with respect, grows with space, holds steady even when things get loud. Kate exhaled. That sounds dangerously close to love. He nodded. I hope it is. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Not everything needed an answer that day, but everything had found its place. 1 year later. The Blackwell house was louder, warmer, more lived in. Leo was taller. His dinosaurs had multiplied. The kitchen was frequently a mess, but filled with laughter. Kate's proposals had grown into fully funded programs, with Richard's support, but on her terms. They didn't marry fast. They didn't move in immediately, but they met in the middle again and again, choosing each other with open eyes. And every Sunday, without fail, they made pancakes, just the 3 of them. No spotlight, no stage. Just a family made not by titles or timing, but by love that came when they weren't looking for it and stayed. This story isn't just about a CEO and a nanny. It's about seeing people beyond their roles, about how kindness, respect, and truth can build a kind of love that doesn't demand attention, but earns it gently, day by day. It reminds us that no one is ever just anything, not just a parent, not just a worker, not just a neighbor. We all carry stories, resilience, and quiet strength, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stay soft in a world that teaches us to be hard. For those of us who have lived through years, loved deeply, and lost quietly, this story calls us to remember that healing can come late, but it always comes with honesty. And perhaps the greatest success in life isn't in what we achieve, but in how deeply we choose to care, even when no one is watching. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, reminded you of something you've lived, or simply made you feel seen, we're deeply grateful. Your support helps us continue to tell stories that heal, connect, and inspire. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And remember, sometimes the smallest stories carry the biggest truths. We hope to see you again, right here, where every story finds a home.